Well, hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard, and this is Lap of the World, your home for road trips and racetracks. Now, if that sounds interesting, don't forget to click subscribe down below to follow along with the channel. Or if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to click like, leave a comment if you did, and I'd appreciate it. What we're out here today doing, clearly we're not out at a racetrack. I am actively looking for a racetrack to which I can road trip safely in these oddball times of Wave 2 quarantine protocols and interstate travel restrictions. But in the meantime, I thought it would be a good moment to deal with another car problem. A problem with, in fact, my 2004 Lamborghini Gallardo, which I've lovingly referred to as the Lap of the World backup car, but it's not really a very good backup car because right now I don't think it's track worthy. We'll get to why I think that here in a minute, specifically, because that's kind of the crux of this video. There's not much holding it back at this point, but there's, enough. But yeah, what we're gonna do today is a quick experiment to kind of confirm my suspicions, or maybe not, and then we'll get around to trying to fix the issue and see how far we get. But as I said, first thing we need to do is confirm the problem. And to do that, we need to do a little experiment that involves going for a drive in the NSX. So why, if I think I'm having a problem with the Gallardo, am I starting in the NSX? Well, it's more of an exercise to objectively validate my butt dyno before I actually call it a problem. So I did research, and the total drive ratio, we'll call it, between the motor and the wheels in third gear in particular in the NSX is extremely close to third gear in the Gallardo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick 40 to 60 mile an hour pull, so I don't even have to go to Mexico for this. 40 to 60 mile an hour pull in the NSX. Then we're going to jump on the Gallardo and do the same thing, because I think that's the sort of like speed and RPM range that will hopefully most clearly illustrate what I'm on about. All right, so 40 miles an hour. That's should be around 2,700 RPM in the NSX. I'm gonna up a slight incline and ready, steady, go. And 60. It's a Honda, so that was by no means neck snapping. But even with the air conditioning on, it was pretty brisk. The car definitely wasn't waiting around on itself, so to speak. And I think if we put a clock on it, we'll have a good comparison here. So let's go then jump into the Lamborghini and see what happens when we try the same thing with a 500 horsepower V10. Okay, so we have now swapped cars, and we are in a car with not quite twice the horsepower and at least 50% more pound-feet of torque on paper. So let's see what happens when we do the same thing. I'm using the same stretch of road, and we'll be starting the pull from the same RPM and approximate speed. I'm going to go by RPM because I know that the speedometer in this car is notoriously optimistic, even at slower speeds. So, having said that, let me show you the gauges here, and away we shall go. All right, about 2,700, and go. And 60. All right, so now having done the test, let's look at those side by side and then look at some data. Bet you weren't expecting that, and neither would I, frankly, based on these cars' stats. Here, for instance, is a dyno graph of my actual NSX. This might even be a touch optimistic, as I've put cats back on the exhaust since, but it should still be close. At 3,500 RPM, I could expect to have around a 1.5 liter Miata of horsepower and around 180 pound-feet of torque available at the wheels. This is enough to shift the sub 3,000 pound NSX along just fine. For comparison, here is a representative graph I found on EVOM's site for a 2005 Gallardo with the same gearing and 5 liter V10. Looking at the red trace, at 3,500 RPM, I should have more like an ND 2-liter Miata's worth of horsepower, and something approaching 250 pound-feet of torque. Now there are other variables, but the Gallardo only weighs about a fat passenger and a few gallons of gas more than the NSX, So although the acceleration through this particular range might be closer than you'd think, there's no way that the Gallardo should be notably slower. Back in the garage, and as an aside, I hope everyone had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. I know my neighbors are having a great time right now, so please bear with any pops or bangs you hear in the background. But how is it, though, that the mighty Raging Bull back here fell by some margin to the lowly NSX in a rolling acceleration test? If there's anywhere that this car shouldn't lose to an NSX, that is definitely the format that I would pick. Well, I have some theories about what's going on. The car is actually not throwing any check engine codes. I think you saw some error messages rather on the dash display during the acceleration pulls. One of those is a side marker blinking error because this car has an identity crisis right now that I'm looking to get fixed here soon. And the other one is a brake wear indicator, which is because the brake wear sensors on these cars are early generation and kind of garbage. I have visually inspected them with my eyeballs, and there is no brake wear concern at the moment. There are no check engine codes. It came to me with several, but I've taken care of those. One was a VVT solenoid, and the other was for downstream of the cat emissions. Thank you. Sorry. An emissions code. So by going back to running catalytic converters and a factory exhaust, albeit a later model factory exhaust, I've gotten rid of those codes, and I replaced the VVT solenoids, which took care of that. I had actually suspected after I did the first, I watched the first earlier video where I autocrossed the car and kind of noted that there was a stumble or a misfire. I had originally attributed that to probably the VVT. This car is interesting. It's actually, it's kind of entertainingly similar to the NSX in certain ways. It has both a variable volume intake system similar to the NSX, and it has a variable valve timing system, as actually most cars have since the NSX and preceding VTEC for that matter. So this has both of those types of systems, and the VVT was that was the variable valve timing that was somewhat amiss, but that's been resolved. So currently it's throwing no codes. Now if it was doing something like misfiring a whole bunch, I would expect it to throw a code. Occasionally it'll have a stumble that could be a misfire, but generally speaking it runs pretty solid. It just doesn't, I don't know what you would call it. It's like anticlimactic acceleration. It's like, I'm gonna do it. And you get to a higher RPM, eventually around 6,000 or 7,000 RPM, then the party starts. So right now, it actually almost drives like like an S2000 or something like that. Like you get nothing, and then you get all the stuff. After doing some reading, I kind of narrowed it down. I was able to kind of refine some search terms and get on the Lamborghini talk forums and look around there just to kind of general knowledge base for anybody else that had the problem. And the most likely suspects that I found, at least this is my best case scenario, is that it is one of these guys. This is a fuel filter. This car has two of them. The service manual or service guide says they should be replaced every 30,000 miles. Now I don't have very many records on this car in general, but I certainly have no receipt or record of the fuel filters ever being replaced. So if there have been the original fuel filters in there for now 67,000 miles or so, it's probably past time. Now if the fuel filters don't fix it, then things will get a little interesting after that. But so for the record, your Lamborghini part number fuel filter is about $100. This was about $20 on Amazon, maybe 25, and it is a Bosch equivalent. So they do make kind of generic parts for this. This is the nice thing about this car, is occasionally you can find a cross-reference. Now if this doesn't fix it and it is the fuel pumps, then we're getting into the kind of you don't want to know category. I say that, but it's not really all that bad considering what you might think. I think the fuel pumps are $600 a piece, but I think the biggest issue right now would be getting them. Supply chains the world over are screwed 6 ways to Sunday, so that would just be a waiting game, I have a feeling, in addition to the not insignificant but not tragic extra outlay. So that's what we're going to do next. Is I'm going to go ahead and, I say, pop the fuel filters in the car. It is not the worst thing to do on a Gallardo. I'll show you the highlights of what I do here, but then we'll see if that actually takes care of the problem and if we get any improvement from that. So, on with the wrenching, which will actually happen in the next video. I realized as I got started editing this that I had already hit what has been the statistical attention span that most of you have for my videos. So I thought best to go ahead and call it here for this time, and then I can spend a little bit more, put a little more effort into creating a more usable DIY walkthrough. As you can see behind me, I've already gotten started here a little bit on, that would be more useful if someone was actually doing this job themselves, rather than me just sort of brushing past the fact that, yeah, you just take some stuff off, throw these on, and it's fine. Because although it's not a difficult job, it is definitely non-trivial. And there are a few details that I'd like to include there. So, and speaking of which, in the meantime, if you have any pro tips for this job, please leave them in the comments below. Also, feel free to tell me if I am chasing a ghost, and early Gallardos that are healthy should in fact have the torque curve of a 90s Honda. It'll save all of us some time, but I suspect that is not the case, so I will continue with my work. And again, apologies for leaving you hanging. That's not usually my style. If you've enjoyed this video, though, please consider clicking the like button below. Subscribe if you want to follow along, and click the bell if you want a notification for when the sort of the finale of this goes live, so you can actually see how the story ends. But in the meantime, though, I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World, and I will see you guys in the next video, if not at the track.